Hello students of history, and welcome back to our next video lecture on totalitarianism and World War II. Now this might seem like a weird thing to add to our lecture series on World War II and why this would have any impact, but I read an incredible book by Norman Ohler called Blitzed, Drugs in the Third Reich. But this book was incredible because what it taught me was that the Nazis during World War II were able to accomplish things that many people never thought would be possible because of, in part, their use of drugs. And this goes back to the post-World War I culture. So first of all, we'll get a quote from Jean-Paul Sartre, who said, "A political system devoted to decline instinctively does much to speed up that process." And this is really an applicable quote to the post-World War I era. After the Treaty of Versailles in Germany, many people have gone on to call this thing the Whore of Babylon, that Germany after World War I was just in a state of moral and cultural depravity. And part of that was because of the loss, part of that was because of the economic turmoil that they were facing in the post-war years, and another thing, though, too, was the increasing drug culture that was happening in the country as a response to some of the problems that they were having culturally and politically and socially. Germany in 1919 became what many people called the Whore of Babylon, and with good reason. This nickname is applicable because of the way in which Germany became kind of the drug and sex capital of the world. It became an artificial paradise where it was sex and drugs tourism. The reason that this is happening in Germany after World War I is because the Treaty of Versailles, especially in that 1919 to 1924 time period, crippled the economy and bankrupted the government to the point where the inflationary cycle was absolutely crazy. So people are flocking to Germany at this time because of how cheap everything is. And it seems like everything is for sale. Everything from drugs to food to women, you name it. Everything is for sale in Germany at this time. Germany started to dominate the international market of drug trade. They produced 80% of the cocaine market in the world. They also were producing 98% of the heroin in the world market. And they weren't just selling it in Germany, they were also exporting that all over the world. And 40% of doctors in Berlin were addicted to heroin because they were prescribing this stuff as kind of the cure-all for any of the issues that you're having at this point in Germany, and any kind of illnesses you're having, just take some heroin, why not? Interestingly enough, the Nazis from 1923 until 1933, when they were in their rise to power, were part of a struggle. The Nazis call this the period of struggle, or the Kampfzeit, in which they thought that Germany needed to be cleansed of the drug culture that they saw happening. In fact, the Nazis were the first in world history, really, to create a war on Drogen, as they called it, a war on drugs. What they wanted to see instead of drugs in people's hands that were an artificial paradise, they wanted to see legitimate inebriation, meaning ideological salvation that you could be finding through mass movements, mass participation in these huge rallies, like the cathartic experience of going to a Nazi rally in which Hitler speaks, and then you're brought to the sublime or nirvana, not through artificial drugs, but instead through experiencing this moment with Hitler. And Hitler is going to go so far as to blame drug culture in Germany on Jews, claiming that Jews are like poisonous mushrooms in the forest that are poisoning German society and poisoning this pure race of Volk and Aryan people. The Nazi Kampfzeit, therefore, is an effort to end the drug culture that was such a problem in German society before 1933, and then also to replace it with something that is more legitimate as a totalitarian kind of ideal in which you find your paradise and your individuality in the group and in the mass of followers that are ideologically drawn to Hitler and the Nazis. And so German society is in the midst of a Sieg Heil. What they're doing is they are mass producing a thing called pervitin, and the Nazis are quickly going to start to use pervitin. Ironically, they're saying we should get rid of drugs, and yet they will be the ones that are helping to jump on this train of using what they called a Volksdrogen. The Volksdrogen, or people's drug pervitin, was a chemical compound that was produced in factories after World War I in Germany and then distributed to the masses at ultra cheap prices. And Hitler and the Nazis were all about it. They started saying that this is the ideal Volksdrogen people's compound that should be given out to make people happier. According to Norman Ohler, he said this so-called speedamin landed like a bomb, spread like a virus, sold like sliced bread, and was soon as much of a fixture as a cup of coffee. Pervitin, as you can see from this stimulant advertisement, really is methamphetamine. And it says in the poster here that stress will decline, depression will cease, sexual appetite will increase, and motivation will be enhanced by the stimulants for your psyche. So the Nazis are wanting this mass-produced and given out to the German Volk and Aryans because they think that this is National Socialism in pill form. Gets you excited, gets you motivated, keeps you rolling, and really fist-pumping or Sieg Heil Fiving during all of the rallies and mass party movement. They'll sell these as chocolates. They say that it makes housework more fun because these methamphetamine chocolates are always a delight. They help mothers to get more done in the house. They'll help fathers to get more done in their factories and politicians to have louder, more rambunctious speeches and mass rallies. Dr. Otto von Ranke is the man that convinced the Nazis to start using this on a massive scale, especially in the military later when we get into World War II. Dr. Otto von Ranke was convinced that you could create a system in which if people take these for 24 to 36 hours, they will be driven, they will be motivated, they will be doing everything that they're supposed to do and accomplishing more than anyone could before because they don't need to rest. And then, of course, if you do that, you will have the crash afterward. But they know this from doing experimentation. As you look at the pictures with the different letters on these men, the men with the letter S, you can see this guy here. This is after 36 hours of doing math problems. He is asleep. He's been taking placebos, not working out so well for him. And then the guys with the B, these are guys that were given Benzedrine, and so that is another stimulant that was used. And you can see this guy is still working hard, but it might be a little bit less enthusiastic maybe if you're using Benzedrine. And then the C is for caffeine, and you can see this guy who's just exhausted. This guy, he's still going, but he's a little bit slogged down in his work. And then if you take a look at the P for pervitin, the men taking pervitin are active. They're working hard. They're doing all kinds of math problems, and oh my gosh, they're just so exhilarated for what they're doing. So pervitin is seen as a very effective method of keeping men going for 24 to 36 hours. Who wouldn't want to use that, especially in a military situation? Hitler and the Nazis, as they are preparing for World War II, are going to start mass producing these pills as a daily part of the rations that are given out to their men. They call it the stimulant decree. The Wehrmacht was thus the first army in the world to rely on a chemical drug, says Norman Ohler. Other armies are going to use this during World War II, just not on the same scale. So part of the success of the Blitzkrieg during World War II is the fact that the German Wehrmacht was so blitzed on methamphetamines. During the Battle of Britain, many of these German pilots were flying high in the Luftwaffe because they were taking all kinds of methamphetamines to keep them awake for the long flight there, the attack, and then hopefully the flight back. So they would be taking things like Stuka pills, as they were called. They were given pilot salt, which was part of their daily rations. And then as they were flying, they were also using cocaine chewing gum, which would allow them again to fly for extremely long distances and to maintain their concentration. So here, for instance, you can see a pilot who's using his cocaine chewing gum as he's flying. And then you can see from this one, this is the effect of the Blitzkrieg. You had men that were taking these methamphetamine stimulants and they would go for 17 days straight. Part of the reason the French were so incredibly surprised by the speed of the German movement was because they were on speed that were making them be able to go for 17 days before they had to even sleep. But then when they do sleep, there's the crash, and many of those men would sleep for 3 or 4 days straight. Hitler and the Nazis planned this in order to make sure that they could have their men moving at a much faster rate than anyone could have imagined. This starts to work less effectively during Hitler's Blitzkrieg into Russia during 1941. So Operation Barbarossa, they prepared in advance 40 million doses to give to their men, thinking that that would be a good 3-month supply of methamphetamine to keep their men going. But as time went on and the Nazis are spread out across a 1,500-mile front in Russia, the attack starts to slow down because it's tough for tweaking Nazis to beat Russia when supply lines be Stalin. So what this means is that Hitler, of course, is also going to be a drug addict as well. Funny again, because the hypocritical nature of the whole thing, since the Nazis performed a war on drugs, and yet Hitler ends up being the ultimate drug lord and also the ultimate drug addict. High Hitler is happening at this time because of the fact that he had a doctor by the name of Dr. Theodor Morel, who was his vitaminologist. And as his vitaminologist, he would give him vitamin injections or power injections before speeches. He would also take speed balls, which are shots of methamphetamine, to keep him going. You can see here some of his fist-pumping, Sieg Heil-fiving speech-making that he's doing, definitely at least partly inspired by the amphetamines that he was taking at this time. But then you can see how it catches up to him. After a while, the Fuhrer, who would be working and then giving these huge speeches and traveling all over the country and all over the war front for days and days on end, he'd finally just crash and have 2 or 3 or 4 days in which he just was not allowed to be disturbed. Good example of that is on D-Day, Normandy in 1944. Hitler was just coming off of a 4-day-long bender in which he had been up the whole time on amphetamines and taking cocaine eye drops and speedballs to keep him going, and then he just crashes. And he crashes to the point where, as his ministers found out that the invasion was taking place in Normandy, they were supposed to go tell him, but they actually had specific orders not to wake the Fuhrer if he was recovering from one of his benders. So Hitler actually slept through D-Day Normandy and missed out on it. He wasn't awoken until they determined this is an absolute emergency. We gotta wake him at 11 in the morning, over 5 hours after the attack had started. Just kind of the interesting thing about the Nazis, just another fun fact that I think that it adds to our study of World War II. I think this book adds to the historiography of the war because, again, so much of what the Nazis are able to do and what the Wehrmacht does during World War II is accomplished because of the fact that they were so blitzed. So this really is a very stimulating novel. It is delightfully nuts, and it's something that I'd highly recommend that you guys take a look at, but also I think you just need to consider it as we're looking at Hitler's use of this in the Blitzkrieg that is to come. And we'll have more of that on how the Nazis are able to accomplish their Blitzkrieg in the next video that's to follow. Thanks for watching.